Amen. Good morning. How are you? Happy Mother's Day. Now, I was thinking, as I was talking to my family, if you came here on holidays, if you're here on Easter and you come back today, you might just think that Renee is just here all the time singing and nothing special has taken place. But between Easter and Mother's Day, she became a mother again. And so little baby Amelia is joining us today, and so pretty exciting times. Esther chapter 3 is where we're headed today if you want to turn there. If you need a Bible, there's one in the chairs in front of you. I can get you there pretty quick. It's page 411, Esther chapter 3. Kids, as always, you've got 5 questions to answer. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 of them. You're on your own for the rest. And 8 completed worksheets get you a gift. For all of us, one of the things we do every week is ask ourselves, what is something we heard today that we want to apply to our life this week? Our heart or our goal is always to take what we hear and then apply it to our life. And so I'm going to ask you at the end of the message, what's something you heard today that you can apply to your life this week? And we'll give you time to share that with your family, your friends around you. Today, where we pick up the story is the main conflict in the entire book. So in the book of Esther, we opened last week with kind of the world that they live in, and then how God is engaging in it. And then today we get, it's as if last week was like kind of all setting to get us to this main action today. And so I'm going to dive right in. Main idea today, if you're a note taker, is trust God personally, not just culturally. Trust God personally, not just culturally. What we're going to see today is that Mordecai and Esther, the 2 characters that we met in chapter 2, who become the main characters in the book, that and the king, they have a cultural practice of their faith. Much like I would suggest many in America have a cultural approach to Christianity, but not a true living relationship. They show us this kind of cultural approach to their Jewish faith, if you will, but not a true relational trust in God. So let's pick up in Esther 3. Let me just get us started. It begins with, after these things. And so before we get into it, let's kind of figure out, okay, what things? Esther 1 was really painting us this long picture of the world that they live in. We talked about this last week, but it could have been done in a couple sentences to explain what gets explained in all of chapter 1. But the idea, the reason the author writes this long chapter instead of a couple sentences is to paint this picture vividly of the world that they live in. It's a world where people are pretty corrupt, where people's practices are pretty worldly and pretty poor, and the relationships and the treatment of people and all these things. It's to paint this picture of the world that they live in. And it's not super unlike the world we live in today, 2,500 years later. In fact, some of the things we're going to see kind of help explain some of the wars going on in the world today. It's really this same Persian-Jewish conflict, right? Esther 2, the second chapter, shows us how God works behind the scenes, God's sovereignty in the shadows, if you will, how God is orchestrating things behind all of it. And so we kind of have this contrast of us living in the world and how the world has different values and how we live in it and how we are to trust God even when we can't see Him. So today, it begins with this, verse 1. It says, after these things, King Ahasuerus, that's Xerxes, if you're a history fan, promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set him on his throne over all the officials who were with him. Kids, as always, here's your first question and answer. Haman the Agagite is promoted by the king. Now, Haman is another kind of main or major character in the story. Now he's promoted to second in charge in all of Persia, which is a massive empire right now. So, here's your question, kids. What is an Agagite? Not a word you use often, I'm sure. So, Haman is called an Agagite, which means he's a descendant of King Agag. That's a funny word. From 1 Samuel 15. If you remember all the way back, it's 1,000 years earlier. in 1 Samuel. About 20 of us did a workshop on 1 Samuel not too long ago, and we kind of did a deep dive on this. And what we see is about 1,000 years before this takes place, when Israel is at its kind of peak, or at least getting to its peak, and its first king, King Saul, is a descendant of a man named Kish, and that's who we're told that Mordecai is a descendant of, right? And so we see the connection. We talked about that last week. Well, then Saul is sent into battle against the Amalekites, and God tells him to eliminate everybody. Man, woman, child, animal, all of it. Get rid of all of it. They're all wicked, and you don't want this problem. And so Saul goes in and in his arrogance defeats them, but disobeys God. He doesn't eliminate everybody. In fact, he takes King Agag as a trophy, puts him in a cage, and throws a party all around this. The best part is when the prophet comes in right after that and hacks Agag to pieces. Okay, I thought it was the best part. Maybe you didn't like that part. I like that part. Okay, so what we see is this disobedience back in the day, and because of that, Saul left a lot of the Amalekites living still. Instead of doing what God said, he left them living. So now here we go, literally 1,500 years later, and we're going to see this problem that occurred because a man named Saul, who was king, didn't listen to God. You with me? So here's the setup. All right, so, and all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. So, kids, here's your second question. You're going to be on your own for a little while. What does it mean to pay homage, and why didn't Mordecai do it? To pay homage is to show respect by kneeling or bowing. Big word, be prostrating yourself on the floor, like bowing down low, showing honor, show respect. But why doesn't Mordecai do this? So the reason the author gives us, and we'll see it a couple more times today, is this old son of Kish, Agagite thing, right? So for this long, this mistake by an ancient king 1,000 years earlier has created this rift between these two people groups, between the Jews and the Amalekites, or especially between the son of a Kishite, if you will, and the son of an Agagite. And so here's Mordecai, one of our main characters, a Jewish man, an exile, living in Persia under Persian rule, who just at the very end of the last chapter saved the king's life and gets overlooked. There's a little bit of a tension between Esther 2 and Esther 3 that if you're reading straight through, you should feel like, okay, Mordecai just saved the king's life from a conspiracy to kill him, and nothing happens, and then Haman does nothing and gets promoted to second in command. Kind of feel like this weird thing, and Persian culture was one of honoring people, giving gifts, and giving positions of authority. And so this ends as kind of like, wah, 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 nothing. And then this begins with somebody we don't know all of a sudden being elevated to this elite second in command position. So Mordecai, a Jew, a descendant of King Saul, hates the Agagites so much he refuses to bow down and show respect. But this doesn't just disrespect Haman. This is also disobedient to the king who made the edict. And we remember last week when a king makes an edict, this is a heavy authority that can't even be retracted, which we're going to see again today. Mordecai's actions here don't just disrespect someone, they disobey a king, and they don't just affect him, they're actually going to put all the Jews in exile under Persian authority, which is most of the Jews alive. He's going to put all of them at risk. So let's see how this plays out. Verse 3. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And when they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them, and they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he told them that he was a Jew. So they want to see if Mordecai can get away with this. And it's kind of like, just think of kids who, like siblings maybe, who are together and one of them's disobeying and the other one's looking like, can I get away with this too? Right? Can I do this, or is he or she going to get in trouble, or can I pull this off too because it kind of looks fun, right? And so he sees Mordecai disobeying the king and disrespecting Haman, and they're kind of this go-between to see. So they tell Haman, hey, this is going on. Now what's going to happen? I want to read verse 4 again, just to kind of catch one more thing. It says, when they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them. And they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. He told them that he was a Jew. Not only is this referencing the Jew-Agagite issue, right? Reliving that King Saul, King Agag thing, but it also sets us up for today. See, Mordecai had not been kind of public about his being Jewish because Jewish people in exile were not always treated well. In fact, if you remember last week, when Esther is taken into the palace and then eventually becomes queen, Mordecai tells her, don't tell them you're Jewish. It's like, so that people don't know that the queen is actually Jewish. And they don't know that Mordecai, this guy disrespecting this other guy, is Jewish until Mordecai says it. And now we have this tension. Verse 5. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, did you catch that, right? They made known he was a Jew, okay? So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. This is literally the main conflict for the entire book right here, is it sets us up with Haman wanting to get rid of all the Jews in all of Persia. Now, just to set this in place, Persia is the largest empire on the planet in this moment. And the Jews had gotten conquered first from Israel, then from Judah, and they had all been either killed or captured. Those who were captured were exiled as slaves, and over the kind of Babylonian, Mede, Persian kind of changes in the empires, their status had changed a bit. They aren't necessarily slaves anymore, but they're kind of second-class citizens. They're definitely not at the top of the food chart, right? So they're here, and so sometimes people don't say of what people they're from, but they're still all in exile. They haven't started returning back to Jerusalem, start rebuilding, and it's right about this, it's right, probably right before this where the first wave of exiles start working their way back. But for the most part, 90-something% of all Jews alive live in Persia, and they're scattered around the empire. So Haman sought to destroy all the Jews because Mordecai's action put all the Jews, not just his own life, right, at risk. You see how extreme this is? I just sit back and I was doing this yesterday. I was thinking about this. I just wonder how many times does something dumb we do actually have this effect that we have no idea about? Another way to say this is, how many times has God had to work around my dumb actions to fix things? Right? And here's Mordecai with this beef with this other guy, and it's just personal to him. But it is literally setting up a genocide of all the Jewish people alive, all really God's people who have been disobedient and have been disciplined by him, but are still alive. And now, all of them are at risk. Let's keep reading, see how this plays out. Verse 7. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, they cast lots, before Haman day after day, and they cast it month after month till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. So what does it mean to cast pur, and why are they doing it? It's like rolling dice, right? It's like rock, paper, scissors, the 1, 2, 3, shoot, and what they're doing is kind of rolling these dice to figure out, and what they're doing is they're trying to figure out what month to act out this plan. So Haman now has a plan. I have a plan. I want to wipe out all the Jews. That's what I want to do. It goes from the first month to the 12th month, literally like 11 months of 1, 2, 3, shoot, trying to figure out, is this month the month where I go to the king and tell him what I want to do and see if I can get away with this. It's like, you remember those old magic 8 balls? I think it was the 70s, maybe 80s, I don't know. Try again later. Next month, right? and they flip it over. Okay, so you get the idea. They're casting lots or rolling dice to choose when this guy who's second in command, by fate somehow or superstition, will go and he will tell the king of his desire to eliminate every single Jewish man, woman, and child in all of Persia. Verse 8. So the dice finally said, go for it. So here's what happens. Verse 8. When Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. What Haman says here is incredibly deceptive. It's kind of filled with half-truths and manipulation. Here's what he does. Certain people scattered abroad, like saying, you know, like when someone comes to you and like, hey, you know, a lot of people are saying this. That sounds big, right? You know, people are saying, and you're like, okay, like, what people? Is that one person, two people? Is it 100 people? Like, what is this? So he goes in with this vague thing, right? Their laws are different than everyone else's, as if their laws are at risk of undermining you. They're in all the provinces of your people, like they're this massive threat, right? They don't keep the king's laws. Well, really what happened is one guy disobeyed one thing. That doesn't mean they don't keep the laws, right? And then he says the king should not tolerate them. In other words, let's get rid of them all. Right? And there's not one single detail given. Sounds like a politician speaking, right? Like lots of words, nothing said. And there's no details, and there's not even who it is. It's incredibly manipulative, but it gets worse. Verse 9, it says, if it please, this is Haman continuing, if it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. Listen to Haman, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, so that they may put it into the king's treasury. Haman literally suggests an entire genocide and then offers to fully fund it and handle the problem as if he's doing the king a favor by not getting him involved. Hey, I'll take care of this. I'll even pay for it. Verse 10. Here's what the king does in response. So the king took his signet ring from his hand, and he gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. You see that emphasis here, right? And the king said to Haman, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you. So here's what the king does. He authorizes it, he pays for it, and he gives Haman the people to do it. The king also gives him the signet ring, right? This is like like signing, right, something today. Like he gives him this ring so that when this is written and sealed, it'll be sealed with the king's ring as if the king wrote it himself, but it's not written yet. Haman gets to write it all out and then seal it with the king's seal, so it has literally the authority as if the most powerful man on the planet wrote it himself. It's his authority as if it's his words going out. Verse 12. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. So next month, here they go. And an edict, according to all that Haman commanded, was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over the provinces and the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with a king's signet ring. This unchangeable edict is now in full effect. Here's what we learned last week. When a king does this, it is so unchangeable, even if the king wants to change it, he doesn't have the authority under Persian law. So this is a lock. This is done. All the Jews are to be exterminated. Annihilated is the term that the text uses earlier. In an unchangeable edict, all the Jews throughout all the places in Persia, literally the greatest empire on the planet at this moment, are all to be killed. Now, for us as the reader, we should be thinking bigger. As we read through this, though it's good to kind of be caught up in the story and see and kind of feel like you're right there, as a reader, we should also be able to look out and kind of place this in the part of Scripture where it sits. right? As it sits in the histories, we already know the promises of God. We know that the promises of God are yet unfulfilled, or not completely unfulfilled. Several things, like promise that they will return to the land. We spent about a year in the book of Ezekiel, where when they were exiled, they were promised that they would be allowed to return one day. We know that through them is to come the Savior, right? That the Messiah that God has promised is to come through this people group. And so here we have this people group, and we have an edict that cannot be changed, and it says that in this edict that every one of them is to be destroyed. At this moment, what the author is giving us is this inflection point to be asking, okay, what is God going to do here? How will God keep these promises to a future people if these people are all eliminated? And will God be faithful to these culturally Jewish people who lack a true faith in him? We should kind of see that in this moment, right? So let's keep reading and find out. Verse 13, letters were sent by all the couriers to all the king's provinces with instruction to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. So here's what's said. An X amount of months later, on this specific day, everybody, all the people in all the lands, not just the Persians, the others, the Amalekites, the Agagites, all these people that are living there, Medes, Babylonians, Chaldeans, all these people that are living there, their job is to kill every Jew they see and take all their stuff. In one day, to wipe out an entire people group. What happens between verses 12 and 13 is that all people are commanded to do this. Not just Persians are going to do this, but all the people are going to do it. So at this point, right, the culture of Esther and Mordecai, the Jews are vulnerable, the culture is hostile, the government's corrupt, fear and compromise are in the air, and God's people are being pressured to conform. What would you do in the midst of all this? Like, what if this was us? How would we, or how should we respond? So point number one today is stand firm in the truth, even when worldly culture opposes God. Stand firm in God's truth, even when worldly culture opposes God. They have a moment. Now, they're not going to live up to the moment. And unfortunately, the characters in the story, the real people in history 2,500 years ago, they didn't do this. They didn't live in extraordinary faithful lives. Some do, some don't. These characters don't. These people don't. They had a moment where they had an opportunity where they could have said, okay, God's word says this. God is faithful to do this. I don't see how he's going to do it, but I trust that he will do it. That's the moment they're in. Now, they're not going to rise to that moment. But the answer is to trust God, to stand firm in the truth, even when worldly culture opposes God. So let's see how the Persian people now respond to this. Verse 14. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. The couriers went out and hurriedly, by order of the king, and decree was issued in Susa the citadel, and the king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. So the people of Persia are thrown into kind of chaos, right? The Persians and the other nations, they're confused and have no idea why they're supposed to go do this. They're being commanded to do it. And so they're a bit confused. But now, the king and Haman, well, it says the king and Haman sit down to drink, right? So they've really just written out this decree that is going to wipe out an entire people group and sit down to party afterwards. Pretty corrupt group of people. So chapter 4 now is going to move from the people's response to the Jewish response. Esther chapter 4, verse 1. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. So Mordecai mourns, and he puts on sackcloth Problem is he doesn't seek God. So sackcloth and ashes were this thing in the Old Testament, in times prior to this, where people would go out and they'd put on kind of mourning clothes. It was a cultural thing. It's like kind of like when we wear black to a funeral. It's just kind of a cultural thing. It doesn't have anything to do with God necessarily. But what it should do is this sackcloth and ashes for God's people should lead to fasting, mourning, praying, and seeking God. That's not what happens here. They do the cultural practice. They don't do the godly practice. You with me? They kind of lean into what culture does, and it looks spiritual, if you will, but it isn't. Now, though we don't know for sure, I've always thought that Ezra and Nehemiah, who wrote Ezra and Nehemiah, right, that these two guys probably wrote the book of Esther. We can't prove that. We don't exactly know. But it fits the timeline. It fits the Persian knowledge. It fits the setting and the culture. And there's a lot of similar writing. And so in Nehemiah 1, it says this, "Now it happened in the month of Kislev in the 20th year when I was in Susa, the citadel." So Nehemiah in the same city under a different king but similar king, right? It says that Hanani, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. So as Nehemiah writes this, he writes about the same kind of a very similar period, and about another setting that he hears about some of the exiles that had survived and returned to Jerusalem, but their conditions are really bad. Listen to this last line. And Nehemiah says, "As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven." Then it goes on, if you know the rest of Nehemiah 1, it writes out his prayer. And so there's this similar language used between the two, except in one case with Mordecai, it all stops with the cultural practice. With Nehemiah, it continues into, if you will, the relational or faith-filled or spiritual practice. And that's what's missing today with Mordecai and with Esther. So what does Nehemiah do? He mourned, fasted, prayed. He sought God for help. What does Mordecai do? He mourns and wears grieving clothes, but he never seeks God. He does what people do, but he doesn't seek God. I want to reread that verse, verse 1. When Mordecai learned that all had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes, he put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. This is a cultural response, sadly. There's a difference between going through the motions and truly seeking God. Lamenting is cultural. So can things be like, and this is where we should pay attention, so can things like fasting, prayer, Bible reading, church attendance, singing songs, can all be very cultural. Right? You can pray and not really mean it. You can fast because, it's Lent. We fasted since I was a kid, right? Or, because it's this, or because it's that. Or you can get up and read the Bible for information, but not for application that you can spend your day on considering, contemplating, praying about that day, and you're missing the idea. You can show up to church because that's what we do. You can sing the songs because everybody else is singing. Where's your heart? Why do we do the things we do? Mordecai is going through the motions. He's going through some of the motions. But he's not getting to the point, the purpose, or the relational pieces. If you were going to, and I know this is kind of a silly thing, if you were going to sing a song to someone you loved, right? I don't care if you're being silly or you're trying to be romantic or whatever. It would have to be silly for me because I can't sing. So we'll save my wife the torment, right? But if you were doing it, you would know all the words. You would be emoting and acting. You'd be in the moment, right? You'd be doing this for a purpose. Is that what we do? We sing? Are we here with our hearts given over to the words that we're saying to God? And I don't even care, do you like the song, don't like the song. Like, are the words something you want to say to your Lord? Are we in that moment? Or are we just going through all the motions? And that's really the warning of today. They're going through the motions, and the caution is don't just go through the motions. Verse number 2. I'll say this. Don't show up and feel bored as you sit through church, or sing songs with no emotion, or hear the words with no impact. Right? Let's keep reading. Verse 2. Mordecai went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. So he shows up dressed in these mourning clothes. Now, this is common throughout Scripture. In fact, back in Nehemiah, it does the same thing. Nehemiah has an opportunity to go in front of the king, but he goes in looking sad, not even dressed this way, but looking sad, and that's against the rules. Well, Mordecai shows up to the king's gate dressed in these mourning, grieving, lamenting clothes, which is against the rules. And so he's showing up looking this way. Verse 3, and it says, in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. Now, you'll notice fasting is added, but prayer and seeking God are still vaguely absent, right? It keeps telling us that the people of the land, the people that are supposed to be God's people, are doing things, but it never gets to the point where they're literally, truly, wholeheartedly seeking God for something. It always stops short of that. So again, they're doing the cultural practices, the religious actions, but what's missing here is an intentional relationship and truly seeking God. So how does that apply to us today? Here's point number 2, internal faith. Pursue a living relationship with God, not empty religious action. Sometimes we can just fall short and do the religious action, do the thing, and think by doing the thing we check the box and we're good, but fall short of meeting with God. We can do that in our quiet time at home as we read the Bible, as we pray. We can do that when we gather together at church. You can be the most faithful person to show up, but be miles away in your heart. Pursue a living relationship with God, not empty religious action. Again, here's some practical thoughts for you. Do you fast and pray before important decisions? Do you read the Bible to just get it done, just for information, or do you read it for application you can spend your day on? Do you sing songs of worship from your heart loudly, lifting up your words to Jesus who truly deserves it? Do you gather on Sundays to perform a religious duty, or do you come with your heart prepared to hear from God and to respond to Him? Do you listen to God's word passively, or do you take notes and so you can reread and apply throughout your week? Do you give God the first part of your day every day, or just when it's convenient? Pursue a living relationship with God, not empty religious action. Let's pick up in verse 4. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her the queen was deeply distressed, she sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Before we start kind of getting on the back end of this, I'm going to pause and just want to connect Jesus into this. I want to, because the people in the story are never going to, not in this chapter, are never going to turn the corner and do what we need to do. I want to, instead of following that, I want to contrast that to what we should do. I want to contrast what they do to what we should do. And so it's really thinking through the lens of the gospel, right? That God created you and loves you, designed you, made you. And that our relationship is meant to be personal and intentional and relational with God. But sin enters in and separates that. And almost like a great divorce happens, and we're separated from God by our sin. And we're born in sin, and then we do sin, we add sin, and we add to the problem, keep getting further and further away. And God, knowing that we could never fix that, we could never work our way back to God. Instead of that, God comes to us. And in Jesus, in the form of Jesus, Jesus becomes flesh. God becomes human in living flesh. The very thing we just celebrated last Christmas. And Jesus lives the life you and I are called to live, but we choose not to, and He did it. And then He goes to the cross and He dies the death we deserve that He does not. And he dies it in our place to pay our debt, to reconcile a sinful humanity to a holy God. He does that for us. He resurrects from the grave to give us new life and ascends in his heaven today, where we get to worship him and pray to him, and he meets us where we are and transforms our life. All those things. And again, the things we just celebrated at Easter. That's kind of working us through the story of the gospel. But in the middle of this, there's the life of Jesus, where he does what we should do, but we choose not to. But he does it all the way up to the point of giving his life for us, where he literally sacrifices himself. He offers himself, doesn't just offer it, but does it, where he gives his life for us. And you know, in those moments we see in the garden where Jesus is literally praying and saying, if there's any other way, I want to do it another way, because this way is hard. But Jesus finishes that prayer with, not my will, your will be done, God. So Jesus literally gives himself to deliver us from Satan and sin and death, and deliver us from an eternity separated from God. To deliver us from the penalties and punishment of sin. Jesus gives his life to deliver us. 2 verses come to mind. Romans 5, 7 and 8 says, for one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows his love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Then just a couple verses later, for while we were still enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son. Much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. So here's the point of that. When Jesus did this, when Jesus went to the cross, he didn't do it for good people. He didn't do it for people that loved him. He didn't do it for people that were on the same team as him. He did it for us while we didn't love him, while we were enemies of him, while we were most in need of him, but rejecting him as well. While we were enemies, Paul writes to the Romans, Christ died for us. Let's get back into Esther, verse 4. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed, and she sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept him. Well, if Mordecai did this to get Esther's attention, it worked. Because this story has worked its way all the way up into the palace. Now, what's interesting is the edict about all Jews has not gotten it there yet. But this story around Mordecai at the gate in his ash and sackcloth has made it all the way in there. So Esther hears about this, and here's what happens. Verse 5 says, Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. All right, kids, I changed question number 4. I rewrote it a bit, so here it is. What does Mordecai tell Esther? So here's the answer. Mordecai told her how all the Jews were to be exterminated in a few days. So even in the palace, where she's pretty secluded, when we hear queen, somebody living like a queen, we think of living a life like the king, but hers is not. Hers is nothing like that. She is pretty secluded. She's kind of one step above the rest of the harem. And so she doesn't really even know this, but she hears the story about Mordecai. She sends to figure out, okay, why is he doing this? And can I get him to stop? And he sends and tells her about this decree to exterminate all the Jews. So now, what could Esther possibly do about this? She's not all that. The title is much bigger than her life is, for sure. Verse 8, Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of all her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. So Mordecai asked Esther to help the people, right? Hey, will you go to the king and just plead on behalf of your people? Now remember, no one knows Esther's Jewish. Right? That's been kind of withheld from everybody. But Mordecai's like, now's the time, right? So Esther now knows the entire story. She's seen a copy of the edict. Now just imagine you're Esther for a minute. It's your people that are going to be annihilated, exterminated. And you are in this position, but it's not like a position. It's you have access, but not really. But you just heard that hundreds of thousands, millions of your people are going to die. And Mordecai is saying, I need you. Her cousin who raised her, I need you to get involved. Verse 10. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law to be put to death, except to the one whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. So Esther sees the risk for herself. Esther says no because the risk to herself is too great, right? It's too big of an ask. When you go in, they just kill you most of the time. Yeah, he could hold his scepter out, but that's probably not going to happen. So when you go in uninvited, you're literally taking your life into your own hands and likely going to die. Now again, let's just kind of go back and remember that the people of God, the quote-unquote people of God, are culturally the people of God, but are not, for the most part, truly connected to God. It's safe to assume Esther's in that same thing. In fact, we're going to see her actions after this reflect that. It's not like she's living some amazing life of faith. She's kind of culturally like everybody else. So what are the chances she's going to live through this in her mind? And so her response is kind of immature. It's selfish for sure. I mean, she kind of ignores the whole situation, which is massive. And Mordecai's request is hard, but it's the right request. So what should be done in a circumstance like this? What should we do in a circumstance like this? Not that we're going to be confronted with this circumstance, but what should we do when it's the right thing will put us to risk? And again, we go back to the question of what did Jesus do when his life was at risk? We just talked about that. He laid his life down for us. So point number 3 today, sacrificial love. Actively choose to serve others before yourself. If we're going to truly be Jesus' people, if we're truly going to live a faith, not just say we have one, then the call is a sacrificial call. It's a love of others. So actively choose to serve others before yourself. Now there's clearly more story to go. So let's keep reading. Verse 12. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said, and then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther. Do not think for yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at a time like this, or if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Now, this passage is kind of central in this book, right? It's one of the most famous verses in the book, and it's one of the most important, but it's often misunderstood. So Mordecai reminds Esther that she's Jewish, and she's at risk as well. Mordecai said, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you'll escape any more than any other Jews, right? Like if this happens, your life is probably going to go too. Now listen to what Mordecai says next. But if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews, from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Now this is confusing sometimes, and there's this subtle theological point that Mordecai is making, but he's missing it. So what is that point? Why it's so significant today is Mordecai believes somehow, that things always seem to work out for them. Somehow. The problem is that he doesn't understand how. Mordecai just thinks it works out. Like, we've come and gone as a people group, but we always seem to bounce back. Just good luck, I guess. He entirely misses how it happens. So let me read this again, verse 14. For if you keep silent this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Who knows whether or not you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this? We love that "for such a time as this" line. This gets used all the time. But it's not written that way. Like, who knows? He literally tees off with, who knows? Maybe, right? Maybe it could happen. Mordecai thinks things will work out because they always seem to do it, right? But he also kind of assumes that maybe good luck or fortune has put Esther in this place. This "for such a time as this" line is so thrown around today, but that's not really where they're at. It's kind of like how Christians today use Romans 8:28, right? We know that for those who love God, that all things work together for the good. We just kind of throw that out when there's a problem because we randomly know those 10 words exist. But don't realize it says for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Like, for those who are doing what God calls them to do, he's orchestrating things. Well, that's the promise. Not just, I don't know, it always seems to work out all right. But that's what they're saying. Verse 15, when Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, she says, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Esther agrees to put her life at risk and take a chance, and Esther calls for a fast, but nothing else. She even says, like the non-Jewish people that are around her, they'll fast with her. She falls short of that fast and plead to God, seek God, pray to God, ask God. She just kind of stops short from that. Kind of sometimes we have this way of throwing up empty words, and that's what she's doing. Last verse today, verse 17. Mordecai then went away and did everything Esther had ordered him. So Mordecai also obeys in a way that's costly. I mean, like he gives himself to this just as she does. And so what are we to learn from this? Mostly today, what we learn is kind of what not to do. Right? What not to do and what to do by way of opposite. The call is don't just go through the motions. And don't just live for yourself. Don't live like people that are, I'll put it in modern day terms, culturally Christian, but are missing the point. So point number 4 today is costly obedience. Deny yourself and your comfort to follow Christ's call, no matter the cost. Deny yourself and your comfort to follow Christ's call, no matter the cost. That's not what they're doing. They're thinking about themselves. Mordecai is thinking about his own annihilation. Esther is thinking about her own risk. They're both conceding to do something to try and save all the people, but they're doing it really to save themselves. Now, we've been hard on them today. I mean, as we've looked at this, I'm not hard on them. The author's been hard on them. But here's the good news about the book. God is going to deliver them. God will be faithful. God will deliver them even though they're kind of dropping the ball and they're more culturally Jewish than relationally Jewish. See, God is still faithful even when we're bad at our job. Even when we fall short of putting our whole heart into it, God's whole heart is still into it. And so our encouragement today, and our challenge is to change, but our challenge is to change because God is always faithful and God deserves it. It's not to change and manipulate an outcome. God's goodness is already there. So what applications will we make? What is something you heard today that you can apply to your life this week? I'm just going to give you a couple today. For any believer, if you're a follower of Jesus, the challenge to all of us is not just to go through the motions or to settle for a cultural version of Christianity, but to truly pursue Jesus with all your heart, with all your life. If you're not a follower of Jesus, I want you to hear how Jesus gave everything to you, for you, to deliver you from this evil world and to invite you to follow him today. And parents, don't just teach your kids the actions, teach them the heart behind it and the application of it. So what's something you heard today that you can apply to your life this week? Take just a couple minutes, small groups if you will. Would you share that with those around you? And then we will come back together for communion.